Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Monica, I want to begin with you. Give me a little bit of background on where the president is getting these numbers and what led him to this.
So this is actually something the president has been talking about for months, Katie. He even signed an executive order back in the spring that was focused solely on D.C. But then in the last week or so, he really took a new approach, and that followed the attack of a former DOJ staffer that really seemed to pique his interest. And he tried to now tie that to this idea of potentially federalizing the nation's capital. But he's taking these initial steps by deploying federal agents. There are about 450 of them from places like DHS, Secret Service, FBI, and beyond over the weekend. They made some arrests, but then, of course, today he made that more significant announcement saying he's going to call in about 800 troops from the National Guard. Now, Katie, we don't really know what they're going to be doing, where they're going to be, what their role is going to be. Likely they will be supporting some of these other agents that I just talked about. But this is something that the president has tried to put into the context of saying that for him, it's personal. He says it's embarrassing. That was his language when world leaders come to visit or when people who voted for him or his supporters come to visit Washington. And he says it's things he's seen with his own eyes, that he's heard anecdotally about, that he now wants to act on. But exactly what you pointed out is the important thing to remind viewers here. The data just simply doesn't back that up. But the president, which this is something he's done on other issues as well, is now also calling into question the data, saying that maybe it can't be trusted. He tried to imply that that was a question, but it was the Department of Justice earlier this year that actually concluded D.C. crime is at a 30-year low right now. And there was a spike after the pandemic. We saw that in around 2023 that has since come down. But you're seeing it right there on your screen. Specifically, though, the president says he doesn't want to see any crime. And it was really notable to us that Attorney General Pam Bondi came out and declared, she said crime in D.C. ends here and now, basically ends today, which is a really bold claim, but one that now the president and his administration are trying to own. They know that they're going to at least have this operation for 7 days with the likelihood it will be extended. And I was just told by a White House official that it seems like it will take closer to 30 days. And then they will need congressional approval to continue it if that's what they decide to do, Katie.
The president is also upset about homelessness. He said that he doesn't want to see it on the streets of D.C. They shared videos of a motorcade passing by some homeless encampments as Donald Trump was driving through the city. What is he exactly going to do with people who do not have housing?
They haven't offered any kinds of specifics on that. The president posted on social media over the weekend, essentially telling people who are unhoused that they should go and that they need to go far away from the Capitol. And he wrote that there would be places that the federal government could offer, unclear what that means, but that they would be outside of Washington, D.C. So we're not really sure what that means, Katie. We've asked the White House for more details, but I think that's an important question, too.
Courtney, how does the Pentagon feel about this? I think it was notable that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was standing right to the left side of Donald Trump, right side, as he was making this announcement.
Yeah, and then you couldn't quite see him, but about 2 people down from him was the Army Secretary, Dan Driscoll. And why that's notable as well, Katie, is that we've just found out from the Department of the Army that they've announced that they're activating about 800 members of the D.C. National Guard as part of this activation that President Trump announced today. Now, we know a little bit more about what they will do. They will be assigned to supporting law enforcement. So that's everything from administrative and logistics to even providing a physical presence, basically a show of presence or a show of force on the streets of D.C. It's about 800 men and women, part of D.C. National Guard. 100 to 200 of those at any given time could be on the streets. So, Katie, it sounds as if it's going to be sort of a rotation of those 800 people. They won't be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week out on the street. But one really critical part of this that we have now learned since the president's announcement is these men and women will be there under a Title 32 status. There are several different kinds of ways that the National Guard can be activated. Title 32 means they will be paid by the federal government, but they will still be on state active duty. Well, D.C. is not a state, right? it doesn't matter. They will still be essentially given the same authorities as a National Guard from a state would have. Why that's so critical is it means that they can engage in law enforcement activities. Now, this isn't the first time that D.C. National Guard has been activated in this status. One very notable time that we all may remember is just after the attacks of September 11th, D.C. National Guard also sent to the streets of D.C., again, paid by the federal government, but on essentially state active duty, meaning they can engage in law enforcement activities. Now, at this point, officials still say they'll really be there in support of law enforcement, again, with things like administrative and logistics, not necessarily more than that. But we could take a lesson from what we have just seen happen in Los Angeles when we had thousands of National Guard and, in fact, active duty Marines who were also activated. In the case of the National Guard, there's still several hundred there. That was for immigration, not for, crime, as President Trump has announced in this case. But it's a similar situation where they were activated for the state, but they were paid by the federal government. In that case, they were actually helping with federal law enforcement, protecting locations and protecting personnel in that case, Katie.
I'm going to go back into the Wayback Machine for 1 second, because I think this bears just bringing up. Back when D.C. was under assault, the Capitol was under assault on January 6, 2021, Donald Trump took quite a long time to call in the National Guard. This authority that he is invoking today is not one that he used in a moment of real crisis. I mean, there's not a crime wave that's currently happening in D.C., but in a moment of real crisis when the Capitol was being assaulted, it took him some time to get the National Guard in there.
And Katie, as Monica was just pointing out, the crime stats, and as we've heard from Muriel Bowser, the mayor here, the crime stats simply don't support the idea that there is this massive crime wave that exists here. That's why it's not really clear that the National Guard service members, the soldiers, will actually have to be brought in for that specific case. It sounds as if they will be, at least at the outset, used more for a show of force, a show of presence, a deterrence for anyone who might be considering some sort of criminal activity.
All right, let's get into the can he do that aspect of it, the question that I asked up top. And I'll give that to you, Lisa. Does he have the authority to put the D.C. police under federal command?
He does, but as Monica was noting, for a limited period of time. And again, the president makes the determination about whether or not there is an emergency. So let's just pause there for a second, because query whether a court looking at that statute is going to say that the president, for example, has overstepped his authority to determine that there is such an emergency when the statute says it's the president and his sole authority that makes that decision. But beyond that, he can only use the D.C. Metropolitan Police for federal purposes for a limited period of time unless Congress steps in and extends that authorization. At the most, that period of time can be for 30 days. So even if a court weren't to second guess his judgment that there is an emergency here that justifies using the Metropolitan Police Department for emergency purposes, he gets that 30-day cap unless Congress agrees and extends it. What happens if the MPD is still under federal command and Congress hasn't acted? That's where we go, Katie, into wholly new territory, much like the first 6 or 7 months of this administration so far with respect to its use of... Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Give me some of the background of why D.C. has its own mayor. It's not a state, but it has its own mayor. It has its own police department. It was not always the case. It used to be a federal city.
And there are some who believe it should be solely removed from federal control. This sort of tension between, for example, D.C. getting its budget and its operations, like authorization from Congress, having to go before Congress every year to do this Mother May I exercise, is one that folks in D.C. would say needs to end. So you're right to say there was a period of time where D.C. was under more federal control than it is now. And yet there is a growing movement within Washington, D.C. for more independence than it has from the federal government to support home rule, to make D.C.
How would they go about
that 51st
getting that
state
authority?
Well, I think they would need some congressional authorization to do it. And Congress so far has been very hesitant to break that cord and let D.C. become a 51st state of the United States. Why? Because many people understand that D.C., by and large, is a democratic city that, were it allowed, for example, to govern itself, it would have representation that's voting in both houses of Congress, which it doesn't have currently. It has a shadow senator, as you know, and a delegate in the House of Representatives who is non-voting, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is a very long-serving member, but one who doesn't vote, much like other representatives of territories.